Good morning. This idea was kind of floating around in my head about Muslims being kind of like Christians because they believe in Jesus as well. I know a lot of Christians reject Mormons as Christians, but somehow they make it on the list as Christians. But Muslims, who I guess also have a lot to say about Jesus in their Quran, and also they believe that he's going to come back. He's a returning Messiah. I wonder why they're not also a branch of Christianity. Thanks. Bye.
I'm rarely asked to speak and be the spokesman of the Christian world. I should be, but I'm not. But that said, the Christian world definitely does not consider the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to be Christians. They don't consider Mormons to be real Christians. And that's the one thing that 39,999 Christian denominations can agree on. Mormons are definitely not Christians, but that's really not the heart of your question. The heart of your question is, why isn't Islam considered a branch of Christianity? I think I got your question right, given that Muslims also believe in Jesus. So Muslims right now, their knuckles are turning white, and they're very concerned about the question, so let's clear everything up. Although Christians and Muslims and Jews were using the same words very frequently, but what we mean is something entirely different. Islam is definitely not a branch of Christianity. In fact, the Quran very deliberately, very aggressively attacks the core tenets of Christianity relentlessly and attacks the doctrine of the Trinity without pause. In fact, in Surah Al-Nisa, which is the fourth surah, passage 171, the Quran attacks it all. Jesus is the Son of God, that anyone could believe in three, and that the Christians have it all wrong. This comes up repeatedly in the Quran with an explicit attack against the doctrine of the Trinity. Tanakh attacks any form of polytheism, but the Quran actually attacks the idea or the iteration of idolatry, which is called a partnership. In Hebrew, it's called a shutfus. In Arabic, it's a shirk, as being the most grotesque and malevolent iteration of idolatry. In fact, it's the unpardonable sin in the Quran that anyone who believes in a partnership means believes in the true God, but in addition to the true God, believes in some other God attached to it. Well, that's absolutely unforgivable. So that's the worst. We had to clear up many points here. Again, I'm not the spokesperson for the Islamic religion, and I shouldn't be. But there are some things here we need to clear up. While Christians and Muslims, true, both refer to Jesus, what Muslims will call him Isa, but they mean the same thing. They call him the Messiah. They don't mean the same thing at all. And this is something that really routinely comes up on this show because the word is the same. Some people think that the idea that's packed behind it, that fuels it, is somehow the same. And nothing could be further from the truth. As it turns out, while in almost all Christians believe in some variation of the doctrine of the Trinity. Now, Christian denominations argue fiercely over which version of the doctrine of the Trinity. For instance, Roman Catholics believe or say in their Nicene Creed the Filioque, and the Orthodox Christians despise it, they hate it, and call it a heresy. They disagree over all sorts of things. You have Sabellianism, modalism. Don't ask. They're all over the place on it. But Muslims believe that Jesus was nothing more than a prophet, meaning that he was simply, for Muslims, he was a messenger of God. He's the highest order of prophets, true, in that he is a Rasul, which means that he had a Sharia. He had a specific message. The message really in Islamic tradition is that Jesus brought a message to the Jews to keep the Torah. That was it. So he is not God. He's not the Son of God. None of those things. Now, it's true that Muslims believe that Isa was born to a virgin, Mary. That's true. However, Muslims find the Christian claim that there's a passage in Isaiah 7:14, that supports this to be completely ridiculous. Muslims are smart enough to know that there is no verse in Isaiah chapter anything, verse anything, that says the Messiah will be born of a virgin. They know it doesn't say virgin in Isaiah 7:14, and they find it laughable. Muslims believe that Jesus was conceived to a virgin only because the Quran says so. No other reason. They find the claim of Matthew chapter 1, verse 23 to be completely fatuous. The only similarity that you can find is they believe that Jesus ascended. Christians believe Jesus ascended, but there's a massive difference. And that is that Muslims do not believe that Jesus was killed in any way. He never died. It appeared that he died. People thought that he died, but he never died. It says that openly in the Quran, right in this area, but verse 157. They don't believe he died. He only ascended. In Christianity and Islam, there is an idea of an ascension, but in Christianity, Jesus died and rose from the dead. As far as the Muslims go, that's completely laughable. They can't stand that idea. And the Quran is very, very clear on this point. Muslims believe that Jesus did not have a family and children. However, that's not the end of the story for him. Because Muslims believe in their eschatology that while Jesus did ascend to heaven, he will return at the end of days. This is a critical part of their understanding of eschatology. He will reign for 40 years. He'll have a wife, he'll have children, then he'll die, and he will be buried in Medina right next to Muhammad. Believe it or not, at the graves at the tomb of Muhammad, there is an unused grave reserved for Jesus. Isa, as Muslims call him. That's where he's going to be buried after, and he's going to have a whole family. So you could see that this is something that just comes up constantly on this show. And understandably, people are confused because we're using the same word, but we don't mean the same thing at all. As it turns out, Muslims do not believe that Jesus was from the house of David, the descendant of David. Muslim scholars differ over this issue of precisely how is he a Mashiach. The consensus among scholars is that he is a priestly Mashiach, a priestly Messiah. That's the general consensus. Another point that's vital to understand. How do I frame this properly? Muslims hate Christianity. When I say Christianity, that means that Christian doctrine is based almost entirely on Paul's letters, 13 letters, and then subsequent decisions made by the church. There is some theology in the Gospels, but not a lot. The Gospels from Matthew 1 to John 21 are basically all stories, gripping stories The character development is very well fashioned. It makes it easy to read. The Quran, incidentally, is not easy to read. I can just tell you, it does not read cohesively the way the Christian Bible does. It's not like you can just sit down and just read it through. It doesn't read anything like that. But here's the key point. Muslims correctly despise Paul. And in a way, the case could be made easily that Muslims hate Paul far more than Jews do. Because Jews don't believe in Jesus. They don't believe he's a Messiah of any type. So Jesus plays zero role in Jewish belief, in anything. He's just not. Christianity is very relevant to us historically, tragically, sociologically, on many levels, but it has no influence on what we believe at all. But to Muslims, Jesus was really a prophet, and he was the highest order of prophets, but he was still a prophet. You understand? He was a prophet, a messenger. That's the term that was used. And all he did was come to bring, as I said, a Sharia, which means a written message, okay, which no longer is extant. Muslims realize that Paul destroyed it all, meaning Paul introduced the notion of vicarious atonement, which Muslims hate. Muslims rely for an atonement. So all Abrahamic religions are very cognizant of sin, very aware that there's sin and what's the solution. For Muslims, the solution, of course, is to repent, of course, and to turn back, to act in a way based on the principal commandments of the Islamic faith, implies giving tzedakah, charity, the same word actually in Arabic and Hebrew, and all that. But Muslims rely on the mercy of God for forgiveness. No one could die for anyone's sins. They hate it. Muslims will never tell you. I mean, there are some Muslims but Muslims do not talk the way Christians do. I know I'm going to heaven. Muslims are very similar to Jews in this way that, it's like you're getting on a plane and no one gets on a plane and says, I know I'm going to land safely. People will say this is the safest way to travel and I hope I'm going to land safely, But Muslims appeal to God's mercy and trust that God would forgive them if not just like this, just like believing someone died. That's totally ridiculous, as it is to Jews. The reason I say that they detest Paul more than Jews do, they really despise him, is because in their view, Paul ruined a good thing, meaning he ruined the religion of a good man, Jesus, who brought a true a true Sharia, and therefore he ruined a great thing and created this machination of Christianity. So he destroyed it was something really good, and Paul destroyed it all. So they hate Paul because Paul ruined a good thing. Muslims do not believe that the Gospels are intact. They believe they're utterly corrupt. Some Muslims believe that there are some vestiges of the Sharia in the Gospels. I don't know why they think that. I mean, I kind of know why, but whatever. All right, so they believe there's some vestige of what Jesus actually would have said. There are passages, like the parable of the prodigal son, so that they like that, obviously, the sheep and the goats in Matthew. So therefore, Muslims feel much closer to Judaism because Judaism is a tawhid in their view, a true unity of faith. That means they're believing in one God and one God alone, whereas Christians believe they use the word monotheist, which Muslims and Jews nervous because it's not really monotheism, but they have a partnership involved. So they understand that Judaism is much closer theologically to their faith than Christianity is by a long shot. Now, as it turns out, the Jewish world and the Muslim world is going through a challenging time, no doubt. But when it comes to theology, the Muslims have, it's not that they have more respect for Judaism, it's Judaism to them is a respected faith they respect. When Muslims say, I respect Judaism, they're not trying to win fans. They mean that sincerely. They do. You'd have to, of course, whatever issues Muslims and Jews go through or have gone through, that's completely separate. And moreover, to top it all off, I alluded to that the Muslim world and the Jewish world, Israel and Islam, whatever it is, we're going through a tough time, right? Everyone's very cognizant of that. It's right now definitely the most talked about war in the world, right? But in truth, this is small stuff compared to what Islam went through with the church. The longest war in human history was fought between Muslims and Christians. A war that went on for 7 centuries. It essentially began in, let's say, 711 and ended in, let's say, about 1492. And in fact, when Islam had lost Europe to Christians, it led to a very, very, the 16th century probably is the most difficult period in Islamic history. Very, very difficult, because Muslim armies came to this land where I live in the 7th century, right? But they went as far, they were on the outskirts of Vienna. I mean, they were very far, all Europe. Eventually, while Islamic armies were able to hold on to Africa, the sub-Sahara, there are way more Muslims in the sub-Sahara than there are Arabs in the world. Indonesia, Europe was lost, whatever. But imagine a war with a number of iterations that would last 7 centuries, more than that. So therefore, whatever the Jews and Muslims are going through now, while it certainly makes the headlines, that's nothing compared to the battles that Islamic armies had with Christians over the land of Israel. Muslims came to Israel in the mid-7th century, but the Christians were not happy about it, and they came in with the Crusades to liberate Israel, the Holy Land, from Islam. And in 1099, they managed to do it. Did they hold on to it for a very long time? Well, they killed all the Jews in Jerusalem at the time. When they arrived in Yerushalayim in July of 1099, that was the French Crusade, the first crusade. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. And so the Jews get caught in the middle. But, everything is destroyed. The Christians will manage to hang on to the land, to the Holy Land, to the land of Israel, basically about a century, not even. So behind it all, forget about any Muslim war with Jews. Now it's hot, but historically it's rather insignificant. That's why even the word crusade, sometimes it happens that an American president like George W. uses the word crusade in one of his things. He doesn't mean anything about the historical crusade, but just that word crusade to a Muslim just kills them. They hate that, and understandably so. So the answer is that Muslims are using the word Mashiach, absolutely. They don't mean someone from the house of David. They don't mean anyone who died and rose from the dead. just ascended. They don't believe anyone could die for your sins, and they despise Paul. They hate him. And as I mentioned, I just want to expose the mendacious texts contained in Paul's letters. But to the Muslim, Paul was the absolute arch enemy who, in a sense, destroyed the world, bringing idolatry to the world, and ruining Jesus' message. So I can assure you that Muslims detest Christianity and do not see themselves in any way as a branch of Christianity. If you really want to insult a Muslim, you don't have to bring out a pork sandwich. You don't. You don't have to do that. You don't do any of those things. If you want to really insult a Muslim, like truly shock a Muslim and insult him totally, if you ever said to a Muslim that Islam is a iteration of Christianity or a branch or breakaway of Christianity, as is the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Muslim would literally and understandably be most offended. And the church, it's not like a Muslim thing. The church found Islam to be very offensive. And in fact, the earliest Christian, I'm using the word apologist lightly, who said the most grotesque things about Muhammad and all those things, was a guy who was a saint from Damascus who really attacked Islam up and down viciously in the very early medieval period. So if you're hearing all this stuff about Islam that is just vulgar, so it comes from Christians. It comes from one particular fellow. But it really is propagated by Christians. So unless you want to offend a Muslim, don't ever suggest that to a Muslim. They would be rightly offended to a point that I don't even know how they would handle it. It's just shocking. Okay. Anyways, thank you so much for your question. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר